Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and today we are actually talking about the US federal government because they're about to drop the ball cybersecurity-wise, and I called this months ago. Here's what's going on. This is coming from Cyberscoop, but this is what's going on. The winning streak, basically, of hitting deadline under President Biden's ambitious May cybersecurity executive order is widely expected to end on Monday, a couple of days ago. Now, this affects basically the changes that the administration officials have been touting the most, which is implementing multi-factor authentication and encryption at all civilian federal agencies. Now, if you didn't know, MFA or multi-factor authentication thwarts about 80-90% of all attacks. Essentially, stolen usernames and passwords are thwarted by multi-factor authentication, and encryption dramatically reduces the risk of either attack or extortion of data, meaning if your data is encrypted and the attackers copy it out, they can't get into it, therefore they can't extort you. Now, the executive order's goal was to, quote, set aggressive but achievable deadlines, and that was according to officials, and they've repeatedly said we've met each timeline along the way. Specifically, that was said by Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Technologies, Ann Neuberger, in October. Now, as important as multi-factor authentication and encryption are, current and former government officials say that those processes are difficult to implement through the federal government. This is a point I made as well. Other single agency deadlines in the executive order that have passed thus far have focused more on writing policies and strategies than actually deploying or implementing the technologies. Basically, they're building the architecture, they're designing the framework, they're designing the policies, and then they are implementing, and it's much easier in a system this vast to essentially create an architecture or write a strategy than it is to actually implement. Now, officials have been preparing the agencies basically to fail to meet this deadline to install these security technologies, which obviously in the private sector have become very common. You can get MFA for free in your personal life, and most corporations are actually now starting to really adopt this, though not all. There are plenty that are behind, and believe me, we get those phone calls. Now, federal organizations in the coming days are expected to notify the Office of Management and Budget, and this is according to the White House National Cybersecurity Advisor, or rather, they're going to also notify the White House National Security Advisor and the Department of Homeland Security's CISA, or Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, about where they still lack necessary encryption and authentication technologies. Obviously, that's a huge thing. The task of implementing MFA and encryption is also complicated because agencies have so many systems to protect. The Pentagon, for instance, was required to implement different forms of MFA for both their CyberNet, which is a system used to transmit classified information, and its unclassified counterpart, NIPRNet. Now, here's the thing, and this is what I talked about months ago, is that we had the inspectors general of all of these major civilian federal agencies essentially come out with a report seeing this massive deficit that the U.S. federal government has in cyber defense strategies. Most notably, where they have fallen down is on the asset management side. I believe it was the Department of State that couldn't account for something like 60% of all of their assets. So are these assets sitting in a closet? Are they sitting in the capital of China or Russia? They can't tell me. They don't know. There hasn't been this proper transparent accounting and asset management solution, which obviously makes it that much more difficult to design an architecture, implement multi-factor authentication. And while MFA tends to be part of a greater identity management solution that follows the users no matter what device he or she is using, not having asset management is a huge, huge problem. There's no way the federal government could possibly meet these deadlines. And while they can build the architecture, that's great. I can tell you exactly how I'm going to build the house. That doesn't keep you warm in the winter. The house has to be built. So I think this is going to be a huge problem. It's going to be a continuing issue that we're going to see. As I predicted months ago, literally like 4 months ago, 5 months ago, this is going to be a years-long project. And if you didn't think that was going to happen, you can simply look at what the DoD is doing with the CMMC, or Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. They had this assumption that the defense industrial base, over 300,000 companies, would be fine by the end of 2020. They started this in January 2020 and said, oh, by September we'll be good. And everybody was like, are you crazy? They extended that 5 years. Now, basically the deadline is 2025. Most organizations are looking to do this fiscal year 2022 to 2023, but the federal agency tends to basically work slower, move slower, turn slower than a private corporation that is understanding the risk and investing in this, but they're also understanding the risk of not doing these things as it affects their bottom line, their revenue, but also their security. So this is a huge, huge thing. The government is finally starting to be held somewhat accountable to this, and by virtue of that, while they're dropping the ball now, hopefully they won't. I'm glad we have these executive orders. I'm glad that they are creating these architectures and writing these processes and policies. These are important steps, but the actual implementation is what really secures us, and hopefully they'll get this in line soon, and hopefully it's not going to take years, but it's definitely going to take some time. And so that is your terrifying federal agency news of the week. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP, and please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please stay private. Thanks, everyone.